Hi everyone, welcome into another episode of Matt's Sports Talk, and in this video we are going to look over the updated RPI numbers. Those numbers came out earlier this morning. Now, before we jump into the RPI numbers, I wanted to mention, well, first of all, off the bat, that if you are finding if you are finding these videos super helpful and or informative, please either like, comment, or subscribe. Any one of those options helps me out greatly. And pardon me, if you're brand new to my channel, please subscribe down below, because this is the place to be over the next 3 weeks as we prepare for the national tournament and have our course of selection shows coming up Thursday, March 5th. And I know I think I mentioned over the last couple weeks in my videos that I thought the selection show was March 7th, but it's actually March 5th. And so, of course, this is the place to be here on my YouTube channel during that week, because we're going to have the final RPI numbers, the final ARC, the final quad records, and then I will be writing down my predictions based on the GPAC, Crossroads, and Mid-South conferences in terms of teams just that are just on the bubble, not teams that are locked in, but those on the bubble. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. And please hit the subscribe button down below so you are first notified whenever I upload new episodes. So with all that being said, we're now going to jump into the latest RPI numbers, which came out earlier this morning. Now, before we do, I also want to share something very briefly, that when I mention these RPI numbers, and again, I like to learn things, by either watching other people in person or watching other videos, which is how I learned this, by watching other videos, that when you look at your RPI number, it does not reflect how your season has gone or how your season will be going in terms of your upcoming games. Your RPI, it reflects more so who you are scheduled to play in your upcoming games, and therefore that's going to affect your strength of schedule number. Like, for example, if you were a team that is, let's just say right around that 40, well, I'll use Indiana Wesleyan, for example. In the previous RPI update, not this current one, but the last one, they were 48th in the previous RPI. Their strength of schedule was 6th, and their opponent's winning percentage was 621. So you look at that and you think, okay, well, that's not good, because the previous RPI update, they had dropped 8 spots because they were 40th in the week prior to last week. But when you look at why they dropped 8 spots, it was because of who they played in those upcoming games. Pardon me. So when you look at where they were last week, who they had in their last 4 games, you had Mount Vernon, Nazarene, Grace, Marion, and Bethel out of Indiana. So therefore, because you are playing now, because 2 of those 4 teams are ahead of you in the RPI and are playing really, really good basketball right now, therefore that is going to cause your RPI number to drop, as well as your strength of schedule number to go up, because of playing that stiff a competition. Now, in terms of your opponent's winning percentage, that basically tells the NAIA Selection Show Committee that in terms of this team, who did they play? Who have they played all season long? And for who they played all season, how did their opponents do in their own respective seasons? That's how you have to look at the RPI in terms of your strength of schedule, your RPI rating, which was Indiana Wesleyan's RPI rating was 578 as of last week, and their opponent's winning percentage, I alluded to, was 621. Their strength of schedule was 6th. So now we look into, well, before we go into this week's, in our last one, St. Francis was 6th. Their RPI rating was 667. Their opponent's winning percentage was 560. Marion's, for reference, Marion was 7th in the last update. Their RPI rating was 666. Their strength of schedule was 27th. St. Francis was 28th. Marion's opponent's winning percentage was 558. Then we look at Spring Arbor. That was 16th in the last update. Their RPI rating was 625. Their strength of schedule 52nd. Their opponent's winning percentage was 532. And again, we're just looking at Crossroads League schools only on the women's side as we're breaking all this down, because the women's side, I think, is the most competitive in this year in terms of the Crossroads League. Now for Huntington, they were 28th in the previous week in the RPI. Their RPI number, or rating rather, was 604. Their strength of schedule was 18, so really, really good numbers there. And their opponent's winning percentage was 572. Then you had Bethel out of Indiana. They were 35th last week. Their RPI rating was 595. Their strength of schedule was 26th, and their opponent's winning percentage was 574. Then Taylor out of Indiana was 43rd. Their RPI rating was 583. Their strength of schedule was 36th, and their opponent's winning percentage was 554. And I already alluded to Indiana Wesleyan, 48th last week, 578. Their RPI rating, their strength of schedule number was 6th, and their opponent's winning percentage was 621. So that was last week. Now we go to this week as of this morning, and I'm going to record a video after this one going over the quad records with you, because the updated quad records also came out, and I want to share with you some very, very important and key information when you are looking at your quad records, because your quad records, for example, if you're Indiana Wesleyan, you were 5-9, I believe, actually I think you were 5-8, I want to say, in the last quad, meaning quad record, in your last quad record for quad number 1, I believe they were 5-8 last time, but that is going to change, because if for who they played in quad 1 games, if those other teams that they played dropped below, let's just say 45th in the RPI, then those quad 1 games would therefore go over to quad number 2. And if they played teams in quad 2 that originally were a quad 2 game, if your RPI was between 46th and 91st, if the team that you played originally fell below 91st in the latest RPI update, then therefore those games where Indiana Wesleyan would then go over to quad 3. And then, for example, if they played a quad 4 team that was between, I believe, 92nd to 149th, I want to say, in the latest RPI, if any of those teams originally in quad 3 fell to 150 or below in the latest RPI, then therefore that quad 3 game would go over to quad 4. So that is kind of a breakdown of how your quad records can be affected, but based on who you played over the course of the season, where those teams originally were in the RPI when you played them, where they are now in the RPI, and therefore that does affect you in terms of your quad records. So that's kind of a quick overview, so to speak, of how your quad record can be affected. So I did want to mention that briefly, and I'll dive more into that coming up in our quad video update, which is coming up right after this one, going over the updated quad numbers, because I'm really, really curious to see where all that stands as of today, because we're in the last week of the regular season. Conference tournaments in terms of the Crossroads League start next week, and then we are 3 weeks away roughly from Selection Show Thursday, or actually we would be I believe we would be 2 weeks away from Selection Show Thursday, coming up Thursday of this week. So it's about here. It really, really is. So I mentioned the last RPI rating for everybody. So now we are going to talk about where all those teams stand as of today. So in our last update, we had St. Francis and Marian, and we're just talking about Crossroads League schools only, that were 6th and 7th respectively in the RPI. This week, Marian is up 1 spot to 5th in the RPI because they beat St. Francis on Saturday. Marian 5th in the RPI. Their RPI rating is 670. For contrast, their previous RPI rating was 666. So they went up 0.04% in that category. Their strength of schedule number is 22nd. Their previous strength of schedule was 27th. So again, they did move up in their strength of schedule because they have Indiana Wesleyan and Huntington to end the regular season. St. Francis was 6th last time, or I believe they were 6th last time in the RPI. They're 7th this time. Their RPI rating is 664, and their previous RPI rating was 666. So they dropped 0.002 because of losing to Marian. Their strength of schedule number is 20th. Their previous strength of schedule number was 28th. But again, for St. Francis, they play Huntington and Spring Arbor to end the regular season, so therefore their strength of schedule number is going to go up because of playing those two teams. So again, that's how you have to look at it. Now, St. Francis, their opponents, I forgot to mention, Marian's opponent's winning percentage is 563. For contrast, their previous opponent's winning percentage was 558. They're currently at 563, so they did go up, or their opponents did rather. with beating who they were supposed to beat, and St. Francis opponent's winning percentage is 577 now. And for contrast, St. Francis opponent's winning percentage was 560 previously. They're 577 now, so meaning that St. Francis's opponents have beaten who they're supposed to beat. And then looking down the list to Spring Arbor, in the last RPI, Spring Arbor was 16th, and they are 18th right now, so they did drop 2 spots because they lost to Bethel on Saturday, or not Saturday, but last Wednesday, excuse me. Spring Arbor 18th this week in the RPI. Their RPI rating is 611, and their previous rating was 625, so they did drop a little bit in that category. And then their strength of schedule is 58th. Their previous strength of schedule was 52nd, so it did go down a little bit because they play Taylor and St. Francis coming up this week, and their opponent's winning percentage this week is 518. Their opponent's winning percentage last time was 532, so that number did drop a little bit, so really no surprise there. And then our next team down is going to be Bethel out of Indiana. They are 34th now on the RPI, so they did go up 1 spot since the last one. They were 35th last week. They're 34th this week. Their RPI rating is 594, and for contrast, their RPI rating the last time was 595. It's 594 this time, so pretty even there. And their strength of schedule is 32nd, and their previous strength of schedule was 26th, so their strength of schedule number did go down. And their opponent's winning percentage this week is, their opponent's winning percentage this week is 556, and their previous opponent's winning percentage was 574, so their opponent's winning percentage did drop a little bit, meaning that Bethel's opponents did an average job of beating their respective opponents since last week. Now, Huntington took the biggest dive in the RPI. Huntington 38th in the RPI. For contrast, last time they were 28th, so they dropped 10 spots because they lost to Bethel last Wednesday, and then they lost to Taylor on Saturday, so really no surprise there. Huntington 38th in their RPI rank right now. Their rating is 589. Their previous RPI rating was 604, and they're 589 now, so not too terribly, not a big drop for Huntington. Their strength of schedule is 27th. For contrast, their previous strength of schedule was 18th, so they did take a big dive in their strength of schedule, and their opponent's winning percentage now is 551, and their previous opponent's winning percentage was 572, so obviously they really took a dive in those categories. And they are 38th now. They were 28th last time. Now our next team down is Taylor out of Indiana. They moved up 1 spot in the RPI, and for them, this is after they upset Huntington on Saturday and after they lost to St. Francis last Wednesday. But again, that St. Francis loss for Taylor, excellent loss. Taylor 42nd in the RPI. This week they were 43rd last time. I want to double check. Yes, they were 43rd last time. They're 42nd this time. Their RPI rating is 586. Their previous RPI rating was 583, so pretty even there. And their strength of schedule is 23rd. Their previous strength of schedule was 36th. So their strength of schedule number actually went up, and the reason for that is because they host Spring Arbor on Wednesday and then travel to Mount Vernon Nazarene on Saturday to end the regular season. So again, because they play Spring Arbor, who is a ranked opponent, on Wednesday, therefore that is going to really help Taylor's strength of schedule numbers. So I hope now you understand, or you understand a lot better, I should say, of how your RPI changes, how you can go up or down, especially with how your strength of schedule number can go up or down as well. And for Taylor, their opponent's winning percentage is 568 this time. Their previous opponent's winning percentage was 554 last week. For their opponent's winning percentage, 554 last week. This week, they're 568. So that number did go way up. And then the last team, we have Indiana Wesleyan. They dropped 4 spots in the RPI. Now, again, before I explain it a little bit better, for those of you that are, of course, I'm a big fan of Indiana Wesleyan, but I obviously stay professional in these videos. I'm not biased or anything. But if you're an Indiana Wesleyan fan, you might be wondering, oh my gosh, like they fell 4 spots. That must mean that they're horrible. That must mean that they're not going to make the national tournament. Not necessarily. They have been a bubble team all season long, and I definitely want to want to harp in on that. They have been a bubble team all season long. They have not been a guarantee. Now, however, despite that, and despite their kind of, they're kind of having I shouldn't say a weird season, so to speak, but a rebuilding year, for sure, a rebuilding year. Now, despite that, and over the last month, this is the Lady Wildcats team that has gone 6-2 over the last month, and the only losses in that time frame coming to Huntington and Spring Arbor, which, I mean, the Huntington loss, kind of like 50-50 in terms of it being a good loss or a bad loss. Spring Arbor loss in overtime, excellent loss on the road. And for Indiana Wesleyan, they are now 52nd in the RPI. And again, this does not reflect them beating Mount Vernon Nazarene by 21 points. Does not reflect them beating Grace only by 6. This means that because of who they play this week, Marion, top 5 opponent in the country, and Bethel out of Indiana coming up on Saturday, that is why Indiana Wesleyan's RPI number has dropped slightly. Their strength of schedule has also dropped slightly, which was a little bit of a shock. Their strength of schedule last time was 6th. And yeah, their strength of schedule was 6th last time. And their strength of schedule this time is 9th, which, again, their strength of schedule is still the highest out of everybody in the whole entire Crossroads League, which is obviously a very, very good thing because you want to have a very high strength of schedule number to help you for a potential at-large bid into a national tournament. Now, looking at Indiana Wesleyan, I mentioned 52nd, their RPI ranking. Their RPI rating is 572. And for contrast, their previous RPI rating, 578, so pretty even there. Their strength of schedule dropped to 9th. It was previously 6th, so again, pretty even there. Their opponent's winning percentage is 585. Their previous opponent's winning percentage was 621, so meaning who Indiana Wesleyan played, basically who Indiana Wesleyan has played, what did their opponents do since last week? And, well, you know, obviously, you know, their opponents have lost some games, like for Grace. Grace lost to Marion and then lost to Iwu. Well, then you have Mount Vernon Nazarene. Mount Vernon Nazarene lost to Iwu, then lost to Bethel. You look at Huntington. Huntington lost to Bethel and then lost to Taylor. Taylor lost to St. Francis and then beat Huntington. So, and then for contrast, Spring Arbor lost to Bethel and then beat Goshen, and St. Francis beat Taylor and then lost to Marion. Marion is 2-0 since the last RPI came out. And then you look at Goshen. Goshen's lost the last 2 games. So that's how you have to look at it. And again, when you look at these numbers, and again, they're not bad numbers. They're really not. Now, for contrast, for Indiana Wesleyan, you know, in terms of an at-large bid into a national tournament, you know, you have a team that actually was pretty similar to Indiana Wesleyan's numbers compared to last year, and that was Blue Mountain Christian out of Southern States. They were the 7th seed that year. They ran their conference tournament. For contrast, Blue Mountain Christian was 50, I believe they were 55th in the final RPI. Indiana Wesleyan is currently 52nd. So again, you know, pretty even there. And for Blue Mountain Christian last year, their strength of schedule was 55th. Indiana Wesleyan's is 9th. So again, Indiana Wesleyan has the advantage, right, in that category. And then outside of that, you have now outside of that, then for Blue Mountain Christian, then you have for them outside of a strength of schedule, their opponent's winning percentage last year was, I believe, 595. Indiana Wesleyan's right now is 585, so pretty even there. And then in terms of their quad records, Blue Mountain Christian was 4-8 in quad 1. Indiana Wesleyan right now, I believe, was 5-8 in the last quad. So again, pretty even in that category. Blue Mountain Christian was 3-2 in quad 2 last year. Indiana Wesleyan in the last quad update was 2-0. So again, pretty even there. So again, that's a quick, brief example of a team like Blue Mountain Christian last year that I think Blue Mountain Christian probably still would have gotten an at-large bid even if they had not run the Southern States tournament as a 7 seed. But again, and I'll end this particular video talking about that. Like, you're going to have teams that steal bids. I mean, you just are. And again, it's not because I'm just not saying that because, you know, I've seen other videos where that's been said. That's not true. because you have enough. You should have, you should be able to understand that teams are going to steal bids. I mean, you see that in the NCAA in terms of whether it's volleyball, basketball, whatever sport it is, you're going to have teams that steal bids. I mean, that's going to happen. Last year, in terms of the women's basketball only, we had 3 teams that stole bids last year. Lourdes out of the WAC. Of course, I mentioned Blue Mountain Christian out of the Southern States. Although I think though really the only one I think that was the biggest team that stole a bid last year was Sterling out of the KCAC, because I want to say they were 10-13 going into their league tournament. They ran the whole thing, and there was no way that they were going to get in if they had not run the Southern State, or if they had not run their KCAC tournament. So that's going to happen. Now, if you're a bubble team, and this is not just in terms of Crossroads League schools, if you're a bubble team in general, you're going to be rooting for teams that have already clinched auto bids into the national tournament, which right now have been Evangel, Langston. We also have LSU Shreveport, and I know there's more than that. We have Olivet Nazarene, pretty much, that has secured an auto bid, and that's, yeah. And, of course, Oakwood out of Alabama, they've clinched an auto bid. So, yeah, we've had teams that have already secured auto bids. Now, if you're a bubble team, you need the teams that have secured auto bids to also win their conference tournament, which you would expect that to happen. That would help teams on the bubble. If that does not happen, then it definitely gets way more interesting. So, that is for sure. So, in our next video, we are going to look at, so that's the updated view of the latest RPI numbers. And of course, I mentioned, I just did a brief example at the end of this video talking about a team on the bubble like Indiana Wesleyan, as well as a team that I think was on the bubble last year, meaning Blue Mountain Christian. And I will add real quick, one more thing about that is that for Blue Mountain Christian, I think they still would have been in now. However, they were placed in the Naismith quadrant. There's 4 quadrants: the Naismith, the Dewar, the Langston, or not the Langston, the Naismith, the Kramer, the Liston, and the what's the other one? The Kramer. If I did not already mention that. So those are the 4 quads, and if you are placed in the Naismith quadrant, you are placed in the same quadrant where the number 1 overall seed will be placed in. Who do I think will be the number 1 overall seed in the Naismith quadrant this year? Right now, I would have to say that would be Dort. So if you are a team, basically if you're seeded either more than likely 13th or 14th in the Naismith quadrant, that basically means you were the final 2 teams that were in as an at-large bid. We saw that last year in the Naismith quadrant with St. Xavier and Eastern Oregon. They were a 14 and a 15 seed respectively, which means they were the very last 2 teams in last year that got an at-large bid into a national tournament. So could we see something similar this year with Indiana Wesleyan? That's entirely possible. We'll have to see how all that plays out. So that's going to do it for part 1 of this video. I hope it was super helpful to you when we talked about the RPI. We also talked about an example of an at-large team getting into the national tournament. We talked about that. So again, if you found this helpful, please either like, comment, or subscribe. Any feedback I truly appreciate. And please stay tuned for the next video when we are going to dive in more to the quad record. See you then, and God bless.